Amazing stuff. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name's Tina K. Bernard, and I'm the Comms and Marketing Manager at Leadership Trust. We are joined today by Sean Flaherty. He is the EVP of Innovation at ITX. He's also an award-winning speaker and thought leader, an entrepreneur and professor, you name it, he is it, basically. He's amazing, and I have had so much fun speaking with him already, so I'm really excited for this presentation. As you know, Leadership Trust, we do leadership development programs, and that's both open and bespoke. So leadership is obviously very important to us, hence why this series is important to us. So without any further ado, I am going to hand you over to Sean, and I'll let him take the lead.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, and welcome, and thank you guys for joining me this morning. I hope you guys are in the afternoon, so you're probably just after lunch. So hopefully you don't have that lunchtime malaise. But this is going to be fun. So I'm honored to be here. Met Leah on a trust consortium that we're both members of, Trust Across America, Trust around the world. And I'm honored, like I said, I'm honored to be here. I have Emily with me today. Emily is my co-host here. She's going to run the chat window. So if anybody has questions or wants anything that you see that I present, if you want more information on it, if I reference a book or an author, she'll put the link to the book in the chat window. So keep your chat window open, keep an eye on that. Couple special requests. I do a lot of this speaking and Zoom. I get Zoom fatigue as a speaker, as I'm sure you guys have Zoom fatigue as a audience member. But my request is that if you can, if you're in a place where it's reasonable, if you could turn your cameras on so I can see your smiling faces, that helps me perform a little better. And then we're gonna do a little training exercise. And also, if you're in a quiet room, if you keep your mute off, some audible feedback is good for the speaker as well. It helps me. If that sounds good, if you can hear me well, show me your thumbprint. Just put your thumb in the camera for me. Good. All right, and if you have a question, again, you just wave your hand like this in front of the camera. Remember, your faces are tiny, so I can't really see. If you just raise your hand in the background, I probably won't see it. So just cover the camera with your hand and wave it. And then I'll know you're interested in asking a question. Amazing. Everybody ready? That's a test. Yes. Show me a thumbprint. All right, good. Let's get going. So I'm going to start by challenging your definition of leadership, because I challenged my own definition of leadership many, many moons ago, and I've come to some discoveries in the course of running a business. I have 250 employees. I got 4 partners that built in a business here for a couple of decades, and I also teach at the Simon School. And have been studying things like trust and loyalty and advocacy and building relationships in the context of organizational development and culture. And I think there's a better way for us to globally define leadership. So I'm going to take a stab at redefining leadership. But before I do that, I want to share a quote from an old friend of mine. His name is George Edward Pelham Box. You guys heard of George Box? He's a Londoner. He got his PhD from London University. Many, many moons ago. There's a picture of him right there. You can pop that up on the screen for everybody to see him up close. Look at that face. Amazing face. George Edward Pelham Box, PhD in statistics, London University, went on to run the statistics department at Stanford, went on to University of Wisconsin-Madison, started the statistics department there. He's written several books on statistics, Bayesian inference, time series analysis. When I first heard about this guy, I thought, oh, he must be the guy who came up with the box plot because his last name is Box, but that's not accurate. That's not what he did. He's famous for this quote, though. All models are wrong. Some models are useful. So that's a quote I'll take with me to my grave. Like, as a leader, in terms of leadership, when we stop learning and we stop growing, that's when we start to die. We start to fizzle out as leaders, right? So all models are wrong. Everything we know about the world is wrong. We only have a partial truth. We have to continuously be building our knowledge base and learning and teaching our people to learn and grow. So everything I show you today is stuff that I've learned to date, but just know in my heart of hearts that I know it's all wrong. I'm hoping that you find it useful. Sound fair? Show me your thumbs. Yeah, there you go. Cool. All right, here we go. So leadership, what is leadership? I believe leadership is a function of 2 different forms of empathy. 2 forms of empathy. First form of empathy is called cognitive empathy. Scientists call it cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy. And what they say is that you have it and it's growable. Like you can learn to get better at this thing called cognitive empathy. If you study Daniel Goleman's work, Daniel Goleman basically wrote the book on emotional intelligence. He's a Harvard University professor and writer, author. He wrote the book Focus. He wrote the book on emotional intelligence. They say EQ is more of a predictor of success than IQ. You guys have heard this before, I'm sure. From many other speakers, they say emotional intelligence will predict success more than IQ, except there's a problem with that because there's a deep correlation between these two. It turns out this is learnable. This is relatively fixed. You know, in the measurement systems we have in psychology are old. They're old and they've been relatively stable. Like this is one of the most stable metric systems in the psychology world. You know, over generations, it works pretty well. This IQ measure, this EQ thing, a little less stable, a little more gameable. And it turns out if you're highly intelligent, you can also grow this. So there's a deep correlation between these two things. I'm going to use a different set of language, though. I'm going to describe when we talk about any sort of quotient that deals with our intelligences, emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, academic intelligence, whatever. We talk about it in terms of our capacities, right? These are our capabilities, our capacities. And in this specific case, we're talking about our capacity for influence, like our ability to actually influence the behaviors of others. Does that make sense? Our capacity for influence. How able are we to influence the behaviors of others? And all these social scientists have shown us that it starts with this magical person right here in the middle that we call ourselves. Like we need to learn what it means to regulate our own, to understand and regulate our own emotions first. And they talk about this concept of like fight, flight, freeze, facade. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winning author, he wrote the book. He discovered behavioral economics with Amos Tversky, Cass Sunstein, Thayer. There's a bunch of people working on this stuff, but Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for his work. And he wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow. So we have basically what the scientists have discovered is that we have two brains, the limbic system that's responsible for our emotional fast response, and the prefrontal cortex, the slow brain that's responsible for, it's actually the most evolved part of our brain too. If you follow Robert Sapolsky's work out of Stanford University, who wrote the book Behave. He also wrote the book Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And you can actually take his course about the biology of empathy. It's amazing stuff, amazing work that these people are doing. So when you're in fast mode, your fight, flight, freeze, facade, you know, all sorts of problems occur when we're behaving in those ways. And we learn how to control that. We learn how to stop that and how to engage our thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex, so that we make better decisions in the world. And if you remember when you were a kid, if you're anything like me and you grew up in a relatively healthy household, your mom would point at you. You remember your mom pointing at you and saying, John, use your words, slow down. So your mom, she and your grandma before her and your great grandma before her, they knew that this was a problem, this sort of fast brain limbic system thing, right? And they taught you how to slow down and use and engage. This is the act of shutting down the limbic response and engaging the prefrontal cortex, the occipital frontal cortex, basically the parts of our brain that are involved in empathy. It's empathy that allows for what I call the big C's, right? Collaboration, coordination, commitment to each other, corroborations. It's what has enabled us as humans to actually do great things. It's what leadership is all about, right? So engaging the prefrontal cortex, the smart brain, the empathy brain, slowing ourselves down. And when we learn to do it for ourselves, we can effectively learn to do it for others. And the more others around us we're able to influence with this skill of emotional intelligence, the better we become at leading. It's kind of common sense. So family, our extended family is the next group of people, maybe our friend groups, maybe our community, maybe our schoolmates, maybe our workmates. At some point, if we run a company, let's just say we're CEO, we're the king for a day. We're responsible for influencing all those whom we serve, that we call our team, our people. And we're also responsible for influencing all those people on the outside of our bubble, our customers, whoever it is we're influencing. Even if we're in a nonprofit, our constituents, our donors, we're responsible for influencing all these people. That's what we do. I'm going to call this our capacity for influence. It's half of the leadership equation. It's only half of it. The other half's a little softer. It's a little harder. I'm going to switch cameras real quick so I can show it to you over here. And use a different color, actually, color that matches my shirt. You'll see in a minute. So this form of empathy is called affect or affective empathy. It's very different. It's also often referred to as compassion. And I'm going to prove it to you with a little bit of math, but it's the other half of leadership that is really, really important for our long-term sustainable success as leaders. So compassion, to simplify the language so it's very clear, I'm going to call this our leadership capacity for caring for those whom we lead. Our capacity for caring, and this is very important. I'm explaining in a minute. So it works the same way. Your mom teaches you this. You learned it at a young age. And as you went through life, you learned to care for those around you, hopefully. You grew up in a healthy environment. And your spheres of who you care for, kind of like your spheres of influence in the other diagram over here, kind of like your spheres of influence, your spheres of who you care for expand through your life until they stop. And if you're the CEO, king for a day, or queen for a day, you're responsible for caring for those whom you lead that you call your team. And you're responsible for caring for those who you lead outside your bubble, who you call your customers or your constituents, your donors, or those folks that your organization serves. So this is our capacity for caring. And it's really important because here's the deal. Leadership isn't about your ability. I'm going to flip back and forth between these here. And Em, if you could pop one of these up on the screen in front of these folks, these nice folks for a moment. You'll notice I draw it denser at the center, both the purple one here for caring and the red one for our capacity for influence. I draw it denser at the center because you have more control and more influence and more caring for the person in the middle than you do for the people on the outside. That's just normal, right? So raise your hand for me if you have a bank account. Hopefully everybody raises their hand. Good. You're all listening. Raise your hand if you save money for your vacations or your kids' college or something personal in your life and your spheres of caring and influence. Yeah. Now keep your hand up if you also save money for your neighbor's vacation. Yeah. So it's normal to have limits to how much you care and how much you're able to influence. This is the way the world works. But here's the deal. Authentic leadership is about expanding the spheres of influence and expanding the spheres of caring, not just for yourself, but for those whom you lead. Like imagine if you couldn't expand the spheres of caring for those whom you lead. This is a proof for that. This is a proof for why diversity, equity, inclusion is so important and always has been. We just don't talk about it in this way. So, and I'm going to prove this to you with a little bit of math next. We're going to have some fun with it. Any questions so far? Everything makes sense? Good. All right. So let's do some math. If we take these two scales that I just explained to you, we put them on a linear graph. We know it's not quite this simple, but if we had a way to measure our leadership capacity for influence, our C/I, our EQ, our capacity for influencing others, and we had a way to measure effectively our capacity for caring, some really interesting patterns emerge that describe lots of things about humanity. The first is, again, with ourself at the bottom of both of these scales, being the first person that we're supposed to influence and care for, right? With lots of others at the extreme. So lots of others up here. Imagine the whole world and everyone in it being the absolute extreme. Lots of others. There are folks, usually you have to use a little bit of your imagination here, but there are folks who don't learn to influence others well and don't learn to care much for others. They go out into the world and they take things that they want without being very effective. Turns out 1 to 2% of the population is diagnostically psychopathic, at least in the United States. Like this is what the social scientists tell us. 1 to 2% diagnostically psychopathic, according to the DSM, which is a standard that we use for determining, like for measuring behavior and for associating people with certain disorders, right? And if you study our prison systems, you find out that like 24% of the people that are in those systems are also, they meet these. So there's a correlation there between these things, 24%. All right. The researcher Martha Stout, and just pop the link to this because she knows it's coming here. Martha Stout, PhD researcher, wrote a book called The Sociopath Next Door. She's done some incredible work studying populations, and she has determined that there are folks, by the way, and it turns out 3 to 4% of the general population is diagnostically sociopathic. Many of them are very successful by most of our traditional measures. So how does that work? How do people become successful in society? Maybe because they're measuring things wrong. They become wealthy, powerful, famous, whatever. Whatever you're choosing for a definition of success. But they haven't really learned to care much for others, right? And they don't care. They protect their bubbles, however small they might be. And, you know, we can think of world leaders in the past who've demonstrated this pattern of success, right? So you think of like Chairman Mao in communist China, probably the largest serial killer in the history of mankind, or Joseph Stalin in the Gulag scenario where, you know, tens of millions of people killed as a result of his leadership. In the business community, I talk about people like Bernie Madoff. You guys familiar with Bernie Madoff here in the US? Father of the largest pyramid scheme in the history of mankind. How did he do that? Very friendly face. People loved him. Very manipulative. Worked very well, but lied and achieved success. Or Elizabeth Holmes, who ran a company here in the US called Theranos, which was a darling billion-dollar company. It fell apart overnight because she built the entire thing on a stack of lies. Now, how did she do that? She's in jail now, but she did it through manipulation and through high emotional intelligence. What she did, she got people to listen and believe, and she led them down this path. All right, there are other people in the world, and I'm sure you guys can all think of lots of these folks who live in this range. Highly caring, not very influential. Highly caring, not very influential for a variety of reasons that don't really matter, but we have to take care of those folks. That's our job, is to take care of those types of people. And most of us, if you're anything like me, most of us are normal, and we live in this range, and we wake up differently every day, right? So some days I wake up personally, and I don't feel like talking to anybody, and I'm not very influential. And some days I wake up, and I tell my kids that Santa Claus is real, with the implication that they might get coal in their stockings if they don't go clean their room. Yeah. And I use those tactics, sometimes manipulation tactics, because they work. They're effective. It gets things done fast, and I don't have to deal with it. You know, and that's a form of leadership because it causes influence. It gets things done. But hopefully, if we look at this chart and we look at our patterns of behavior as leaders, we would cluster more up in this range, I hope, if we're normal and we're decent leaders. All right, with that, I'm going to stop here, and we're going to go to interactive mode. I'm going to ask you guys a question. I'm going to give you 2 rules. I'm going to ask you to tell me, who do you think is the greatest leader in the history of mankind? And I want you to tell me, I want you to choose somebody who's dead, so we don't have to deal with any current political quagmires. And I want you to choose somebody that everyone else on this Zoom call is most likely to recognize. So give me some names. Throw some names out there. Or put them in the chat.
Churchill.
Mandela, great. Keep going.
Churchill.
Mandela, all right. Churchill. Winston Churchill. Who else?
Mother Teresa.
Mother Teresa, I love that one. Is that better?
Jesus.
JC, great answer. Who else?
Mahatma Gandhi.
Mahatma Gandhi, outstanding. Keep going. One more.
Greatest leader?
Greatest leader.
Hitler.
Wow. Okay. That's an interesting answer. First
Martin
time
Luther King.
Actually, I've gotten that one, but I put him down here because I think his spheres of influence were very restricted. Who was the last one that was just said?
Martin Luther King.
MLK. All right, great. All right, so here's an interesting thought experiment, right? So I've been doing these talks in an organization called Vistage for a couple of years now, and I've been collecting all of the answers I've gotten from leaders across America. So it's a little skewed. These are leaders in America, and these are the answers they've given me. Can you pop up the chart right on the screen here? These are the answers I've gotten from leaders across America. Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, Maya Angelou, Harriet Tubman, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she's a recent addition, John F. Kennedy, Mahatma Gandhi, Abe Lincoln, Eleanor Roosevelt. All right. You'll notice a lot of those faces were the same faces that you guys put up here, except for Hitler. Hitler, I used to run the exercise and have people throw names out that for leaders that would be in this range. And the answers I got were, leaders like Hitler and Bernie Madoff and Elizabeth Holmes, Stalin, Mao, folks like that. Got lots of those. Anyway, so there's a pattern here. So there's a pattern in the data, and the pattern looks like this. If you look across the population of people as we think about what great leadership means, the pattern of leaders in America, and now I'll include the answers that you guys gave me with the exception of Hitler. The pattern that I see is that these people, all of them, cause this shift, right? They cause the shift in normal people from the bottom left to the upper right. They cause this shift to occur in normal people. They cause this expansion of the spheres of caring, and they were highly influential. It's one thing to be very influential and successful by traditional measures, like how many people were you able to kill, or how many countries were you able to take over, and call that success. But it's different when you start thinking about, hey, what about sustainable long-term caring? Like, we cause the world to be a better place. Yeah. So this is the pattern that I see that great leaders espouse. And what I believe is business has the opportunity and really the responsibility to do the same thing. I believe that business, for the most part, free market capitalism, for the most part, there's just like anything in the world, there's good and there's bad about everything, but it's brought more people out of poverty than any other single thing that we can point at. And when it's done well, it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, Tanuke.
Would you say of all the people who we've kind of said are, powerful influencers and leaders, would you say that they share the same general skills or that they, I'm kind of thinking like nature and nurture, were they all naturally able to be capable, great, strong leaders, or is that something that you think they were taught?
That's a fantastic question, and I think the jury is in on the answer. In my opinion, I've got a whole talk track on that I wasn't going to do today, but I'll talk about it a little bit. There's a million lists out there that describe the traits of great leaders, and there's a lot of people trying to figure this stuff out. The best one I've found comes from Rice University. So Rice University, there's 21 traits that they've identified make great leaders, and they've proven unequivocally proven that every one of those 21 traits, some people are born with natural skills and others aren't, but every single one of them is malleable. They're all learnable, and if they're all learnable, they're all teachable. Therefore, when I speak, I just spoke a couple weeks ago to 11,000 troops in the U.S. Army on the Western Pacific Fleet for General Gerard in Hawaii, and I opened with a little quote. Not every one of us can be the leader, but we can all be a leader. And it's actually our responsibility to be a leader, right? And when we go through life, understanding what leadership really is a skill. It's an important skill. And we get to use it in our church groups, on our sports teams, in our friend groups, as a parent, as a friend, as a colleague. No matter where you are in business or in life, you're leading. You have the opportunity to lead. You have the opportunity to influence people, and it's a responsibility that shouldn't be taken lightly. It's important. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So here's where I believe great business leaders live. Great business leaders have this opportunity. And you can't put us up here. You can't put us up here because we're not martyrs. I'm not willing to die for my organization. I like many of these folks were, or suffer greatly, or spend 10 years in prison, right? So these are folks that did those things and put their lives on the line and changed the world through great suffering. We're business leaders. We're profit-mongering capitalists at the end of the day, and we should be honest about that. But that doesn't mean we don't have a responsibility to lead well. And that doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to understand who our constituents are and to make sure that we take care of them. And the best leaders in the world, they make a profit, they run a good business, they make a profit, and they are responsible and ethical with that profit. They take some of it and they invest in their people. They take some of it and they invest in their customers. They take some of it and they invest in research and development, and they make the world a better place through their products and services. They reinvest in their planet. They make sure they take less from the planet than they give back to it. Yeah, they make sure to invest in their nation and pay taxes to take care of their local communities. They invest in their local communities and they give a little back in that way. And if they do their jobs really well, they get to do all of these things and leave a little profit for the shareholders because they took a risk, and that's the game we're playing, and it's fair. But the best, most sustainable organizations, you see this pattern. You see this pattern of giving back in appropriate volumes and their ability to make a profit. How's that feel? Does that make sense? Any questions on that? No questions. I must be explaining it really well. All right. So here's another pattern that I see. And on this chart, so first of all, Tanika, you asked this question about, is this learnable? Well, I think I just gave you somewhat of a proof to show you that this is learnable, because here's what I believe. I believe that for the most part, this is where babies are born. I've had 4 of them. And I will tell you, they're all little screaming psychopaths when they poop themselves or they're hungry. And it's the job of the family, right, to quickly normalize and teach them what does normal behavior look like when you're hungry, or when you need to get your diaper changed, or when you want a toy. You don't beat your brother over the head with it, you know? So we teach our children what normalcy looks like, and we teach them how to care and how to influence, how to get what they want out of the world in a reasonable way. So this is another way to think about it. It's a little thought experience, a proof, so to speak, for how malleable all of these skills are. You know, and again, our ability to lead is about our ability to expand these spheres of caring, not ourselves. It's not about our ability to care. Of course we care. We care a ton. That's great. But if we're going to lead and we care about leading, it's about our ability to scale this through others. To scale it through others. The same with our capacity for influence. So leadership is about our authentic capabilities. It's about our ability to actually influence and make change, cause change to occur. And if we do it well, we're doing that and this at the same time, right? We're expanding the spheres of caring for the population of people we're leading, and we're expanding our spheres of influence for the people that we're leading. All right. Now, if you take this chart, like I did over here, these little green dots, and you plot individual behaviors on it, you can look at your collection of leadership behaviors over a period of time, right? And you can figure out where you are, and then you can ask yourself when you're about to go lead, hey, I need to cause this change to occur. How am I going to do it? And you can manipulate, or you can inspire. And I draw a line down the middle of this chart because I believe most of us, this is my belief, I don't have any evidence, any data or evidence to support this, but I believe most normal people are about 50-50 above the line, below the line. They just go on about their day, getting what they want, sometimes manipulating, sometimes inspiring, but causing change in the world. And I think what great leaders do, and you'll notice I have drawn the line through great business leaders. Occasionally you have to go below the line and get things done because it's expedient. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying you should never do it, but you should pay close attention to your ratio of behaviors that are above the line versus behaviors that are below the line, because that's what great leaders do. And when you're operating above the line, you're creating a sustainable environment by inspiring people. And when you're operating below the line, you're getting stuff done, And you may be effective at getting things done, but you're largely doing it through manipulative tactics. And this is what the scientists call low quality motivation. It works, but it's not sustainable. That's why they call it low quality motivation. Generally extrinsic motivators. And above the line, scientists call that intrinsic motivators. This is high quality motivation when you produce it because it sustains. How does it sustain? Because it's been internalized by the people that you're leading. That's called intrinsic motivation. That's what we need to produce. That's what leadership is all about. It's about causing intrinsic motivation in the people you're leading so that you can maximize their creativity. That's what leadership is about, maximizing creativity of the people that you lead towards a common goal. You want to maximize the creativity of the people you're leading towards a shared, meaningful goal. And we're going to talk a little bit about this inspiration and extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Emily was awesome here. She put up this slide, a couple of my heroes. You can put it up in front of them if you want. These two gentlemen basically discovered intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. They're University of Rochester, so they're from my hometown. They wrote the self-determination theory, which is a series, it's a set of theories. There's 5 mini theories or sub-theories below it, but it's the science of human intrinsic motivation. It's the science of what gets us up in the morning with a spring in our step to go do that thing. And when you lead well, whether you realize it or not, when you're leading well, you're causing intrinsic motivation in the people that you're leading. That's what you're doing. I'm going to show you a couple of the patterns that I've seen that great leaders do, that they espouse when they're causing this intrinsic motivation, which leads to more creativity, right? Towards a common goal. Motivation is the wellspring of all creativity. I'll talk about that again in a minute. All right, with that, any questions?
I have a quick one. It's going to be 2 all the way. So
go for it. I love your questions.
So Sean, with this, with the spheres and saying that getting, as a CEO at the top, it's not just about obviously influencing and caring for everyone, because you can't do that, but it's about making others care and others. Is it also that others influence as well? So you kind of need to get to the point where, because you're doing all these things, in your example, you had, people giving back to the community and people, the company giving back to the community, the company caring for others in these ways. By doing that, are you then also getting those, do you need your team to be on board and also want to do these things and actually also want to care and influence in the same way as you as a leader?
Great question. So first of all, you used a couple of words in there, like you can't make people care. You can't make people influence others. The only thing you can do is cause a change to the environment. So you can cause a change to the environment, which causes people to care more and to influence more. And with that, that's a perfect lead into my next conversation, Tanuke. So thank you for that. It's almost like I seeded her with a question. Let's ask ourselves this question. Like, let's come back to this chart here real quick and ask ourselves, how did these people do it? What is the one tool? There's one tool that Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Winston Churchill, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, what is the one tool these people had in common across generations, millennia, race, continents, like however you want to dissect these people? What's the one tool they all had in common? There's only one. One tool.
Themselves.
Huh? They had themselves, but they were each different. No, the one tool they all had in common, and I would argue, so somebody wrote humility, which is awesome, but I would argue Winston Churchill, humility, maybe. The one tool I think they all had in common was influence. Yeah, influence is good, but they were all influential, but how? What was the tool they used to be influential?
Emotions?
Emotions?
Pulling out your emotion?
They pulled out your emotions. How? How did they pull out your emotions?
Strong orators.
Orators, there we go. They were orators. They used the tool of language. They used their words really, really well. And not only that, they acted in ways that were consistent with those words, right? So these are people that actually put their lives on the line to defend their causes. So the one tool they all had in common was the words that they used. And it seems like common sense, right? But this is what leadership is all about. Leading occurs in conversations. When you're leading people, it occurs sometimes one-to-one, sometimes one-to-many, but it occurs when you are able to communicate, corroborate, collaborate, leverage your thinking brain to actually cause other people to think. Yeah, it only occurs through words and language. Words and language that lead to collective action. They lead to collective action. Those are the only ones that really matter. And most of our words don't matter. The ones that do are the ones that resonate and actually lead to action. Yeah? So, all right, so let's dissect this concept a little bit. Let's talk about words. You can pop that up in front of everybody. Oh, I'm down to 15 minutes. So we're going to run out of time soon. Hope you guys are enjoying yourselves. So let's talk about words. So before we talk about words, let's dissect this concept of culture. Because I think culture is a manifestation of context. And we need context and culture in order to achieve anything. And I believe that culture always starts with our shared ability to communicate with each other, right? That's the foundation of all culture. Let's call that our lexicon. The words that we share in common, the words that we use, that we have shared meaning for. Now, if we're running an organization and we think about culture, if I were to ask every one of you folks on this call to define culture for me, I would get 12 different answers. And they would be all right, but all useless to each other, right? That's the definition of subjectivity. So let's be a little purposeful about this thing called culture. I think words are what cause these big cultural shifts, right? Just like the great leaders that we put on the chart, over here. They use words. So it starts with words that we choose to make important, that we turn those words into some sort of principles and values and beliefs that we espouse. Beliefs. In any organization, so any group of people that we're leading, that we want to cause change in, it has to come from some shared beliefs, principles, and values. So we have shared principles, which we, by the way, can't describe without words. So there's certain words that we choose to make important, make powerful. We leverage those words. We turn them into principles and values that we can now espouse. We turn those. Every great culture has great mantras. Call them sound bites, call them whatever you want to call them, but little things that help us make decisions in the wild when the leader's not in the room. Mantras that espouse our beliefs, our principles, our values. These things turn into stories and lore. Stories and lore. I love that word, lore. I love, anyway, I don't have much time, so I'm not going to go into too much drama. So stories and lore, which have mantras and espouse our values, our principles, our beliefs, and shared words, right? So all great cultures, by the way, have great stories and lore. Every business, every organization, every country, every team, everything that has, and by the way, every group of 2 or more people has a unique culture. Every group of 2 or more people trying to achieve something together has a culture. Whether you choose to recognize it or not, it's there. If you run a large organization, I run a company of 250 people, I will tell you there's tons of subcultures on sub-teams that interact differently. I hope they roll up into some master culture to some extent, and we do our best to try to influence that, which is all we can do. But if you're leading, this concept of culture is really important because it is the words that make us unique. It's the values, it's the beliefs, it's the things that we're trying to accomplish together. So all great stories, all great lore has heroes, and all great stories and lore have villains, the evil in the world that we're trying to defeat as the result of our work. Yeah? And none of this matters. Again, none of it matters until it results in this layer. And this is where every culture manifests in what I call the layer of art. And I believe that every organization has the opportunity to be a work of art. Every company, every nonprofit, every business, every country, every culture has the opportunity to be a work of art. And it's a group of people coordinating action, performances, ceremonies, rituals, as well as the things that they produce, the artifacts that they produce as a result of their working together and having a culture. Artifacts, symbols. This is where it manifests in things that we can see, sometimes touch and feel. Rituals, ceremonies, the way in which we conduct ourselves, traditions. This is the layer where the art manifests. But none of this really matters either until it shows up in this outside layer. And this is the layer we talked about earlier, where your culture actually lives and where you as a leader can impact it. Where it actually lives is in the conversations that are occurring in the hallways when you're not in the room. That's where your culture lives. In the conversations that are occurring in the hallways when you're not in the room. You can put the chart up, yeah. And you don't have a whole lot of control over that. You can only influence it. And the way you influence it is by influencing the lower levels of the cultural onion. Let's just call this the cultural onion. David Packard had a cool saying, and there's lots of other business leaders that have led this way over the years, but he called it management by walking around. David Packard from Hewlett Packard, HP, wrote the book, The HP Way. Management by walking around, making sure that you are engaged and on the floor and seeing what's going on and measuring and figuring out what's working, amplify the things that are working. You amplify the things that are working powerfully, and you suppress the things that aren't. And you tell the stories where you see them manifesting your principles, your values, the mantras. You amplify the art, you make sure that this stuff is world-class, represents the brand that you want to represent, and hopefully that has influence over the conversations that are occurring in the hallways when you're not in the room as the leader. So these words are the things that we have the most control over and the most influence over, but only if we're actually modeling the behaviors that we expect. We have to model the principles, model the values, model the beliefs, use the mantras to make decisions, tell the stories when it makes sense to tell them, and be proud of our art. Like I said, there's nothing in the world, in theory, that's caused more positive change than free market capitalism. And yes, it has its drawbacks, and yes, it has distortions, and there's things that are broken about it, but it's also caused a lot of people to come out of poverty in a lot of places. And when you run a really good organization and you're doing all these things that we talked about over here to bring it back together, when you run a company that's purposefully making sure it's investing in its people and its customers and its R&D and its planet and the nation and the communities that it serves, when you're doing that well, it is a form of art. And this is the opportunity that we all have. Like I said, not everybody can be the leader, but we can all be a leader. And when we lead well, we maximize the creativity of the people that we lead. And we cause our spheres of caring to expand and our spheres of influence to expand. And with that, I'll close up because I'm out of time, and I'll ask for some questions. Anybody have any questions?
I do, but I'm giving people a chance.
Yeah, no worries.
How do you bring someone on board that doesn't believe the system?
Well, I think, Mark, that's a good question, but I don't understand fully what you mean by the system. Like this system?
Well, if you've got a business,
yeah,
and you've got your culture and the one we just went through, the art, and somewhere down that line, someone is, and I'm consistently breaking it, or doesn't believe it, how do you turn that round? Does that make sense? Sorry, it's a bit.
I think so. And it sounds like you're struggling. You may be struggling with a problem that I've seen a lot of business owners struggle with. And that's where you have somebody potentially on your team who's incredibly competent and really good at his job, but maybe is a cultural cancer. And my opinion on that, and the way that I've executed it historically in my business, is I think this is a really important skill right here, to identify the 3 to 4% of problematic people who are very smart, but not good for your culture. And my strategy has been twofold. It's been either isolate them completely, so turn them into a subcontractor, put them in a bubble where they can't affect the rest of the culture, or get rid of them. And although it sounds painful and it's hard to do, it can be very hard to do. It's the best thing in the world for your culture if you cannot get them over this hump, if you cannot get them to see what we're really doing this for, in addition to making a profit, because it's gonna destroy your ability to build a powerful culture, in my humble opinion.
Are there any tools that you can use to just follow on from that?
Tools, guy.
Or do you want to run through some, because it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, is it? Especially like in a fully employed market, trying to find someone to replace someone who might be a cultural cancer is a pretty hard thing to do. Is there anything that you could recommend that would help to bring them on board?
I do. I have a whole nother talk track on building trust and loyalty and advocacy into your culture as like fundamental components of the culture. And I believe that the best tool you could possibly have, the best asset that your business has, is its advocates. Is the people who are helping you invest in a future that you all believe in. And when you build your culture around that kernel of advocacy, of growing the group of people that are actually fully invested in building this thing together, and you're purposeful about it, and it's stated, and it's a part of your culture because it's a part of your lexicon, and you have goals to prove it, that you actually care about it. When you do this well, it becomes so much easier to find the next advocate, because you won't even have to recruit. Your people will be out recruiting for you. And your attrition rates will go down. It'll be easier to retain the people that actually care about what you care about. And it's hard work, and you'll never get it right. You'll never get it perfect, but it's useful when you do it well. So I have the tools, but with only 1 minute remaining here, I'm not sure I'm gonna have time to go through them with you. But I'd love to come back, and I'd love to come to England and speak to you guys in more depth about all this stuff, if you'll have me, maybe after COVID's over.
We'll gladly have you over.
Cool. Yeah, I have a bunch of frameworks on trust and loyalty and advocacy, and how to do that, and how to measure it, and all the things that are, I think, critical to building a great culture. And I also think that there's no magic formula, guy. Like, you have to actually take the ideas and apply it in context with your leaders to make it work. Like, it's got to be something that they make their own. So I have a formula, but you have to apply it yourself. It's not like a perfect toolkit that you can just bring in and solve all the world's problems. Sorry, Tanuke, you were going to say something?
I was going to say that Emily pointed out that if you have any more questions, or if you want the slide deck, just to let me know, or to pop your email in the chat box, so it'll go directly to Emily and Sean, and they can send everything over, or just email myself or Leadership Trust, and we will send it all over to you as well.
Cool. Yeah, she'll send you all the things I drew. She'll send you the slides for, along with the folks that I quoted and some references. Awesome.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sean. I don't know if anyone has any last minute burning questions. Do you wave in your thumb so I know now? Otherwise, as I said, do feel free to email them. But I just want to thank you again for actually doing this presentation for us, Sean. It was absolutely wonderful. And Emily, I can't believe how quick you are on the slides and bringing things up. Even when I threw curveballs, you found the right slides to accentuate the point, and that was amazing. So thank you both very much. Thank you for everyone who joined the call today and participated and listened. It was amazing. Yeah, just thank you, and hopefully we can do one again very soon.
I would love that. Thank you, guys.
Have a lovely afternoon. Have a lovely morning, Sean and Emily too.
All right.
You've got some emails coming through now, so I'll give you a second to get them before you all log off. But thank you, everyone. Bye.